It's nice to be here. As the old saying really goes, but it's becoming truer and truer for me. It's nice to be anywhere. But it really is, and it's a really nice turnout tonight. I didn't expect that, especially with the Warriors game on and a storm coming in and all this other stuff, that kind of stuff. So what I want to make sure is that you come away from this feeling like this was worth me getting out here and doing this. So what do I have to say? And the only reason I'm using the PowerPoints, mostly I'm going to use a blackboard again. I haven't come back with chalk up my nose and all over my clothes since teaching in the South Bronx in the 60s. And I can tell you, you know. But they did make an innovation. One of them is anti-dust chalk. That's possible. Teacher, I'm not a doc. You know, it's interesting because sometimes I actually get introduced as a doctor, you know, and I'm a high school teacher. That's what I do. But I had a joke about it. It reminded me about when they were talking to the Dalai Lama. And he says, well, I'm just a simple monk. You know, well, I'm just a simple high school teacher. And I'm not really in private practice. I'm doing it some, but I'm really just enjoying my grandchildren that are living upstairs. And believe it or not, I got a son that is a junior at Berkeley High School. And wow, has that given me a whole other level of looking at this marijuana thing. Understanding the brain science will allow the adult to be more confident when talking with youth. So here's the deal. I today was at this big time, what they call stakeholders committee for Alameda County, you know, with the product that's going to come out here. I'm amazed. People don't know anything about weed. I'd said to them today, all these people sitting around, does anybody know, you know, is marijuana an upper or downer or an all-arounder? Nobody at the table knew. An all-rounder is what it is. It's a hallucinogenic. People will think of it as being a downer because it slows you down, but it doesn't slow you down because it's a downer. That's a whole different ballgame. And let me tell you, this stuff gets to be really relevant when you have kids that do something called crossfading. I wonder whether anybody in this audience knows what crossfading is about. One person, because you're working with the kids. Right? Otherwise, and most of the kids will raise their hand. They know what it is. Of course, what crossfading is about is mixing alcohol and marijuana together. And the reason is mostly that's the two drugs that are really available for kids is weed and alcohol. So they hear a rapper that says, well, listen, if you really want to get drunk, mix alcohol and Xanax. That gets you really drunk. Okay, well, mixing alcohol and Xanax will kill you. Mixing alcohol and weed will not kill you because one's mixing a down with another down. That's how we lose and lost all those people in the 60s, from Jimi Hendrix to Janis Joplin to everything else. So there's a way in which people need to have some education about marijuana. And I think the reason why people know so little about it is that it's been so divided. I mean, going all the way back to the 60s and hippies, all the way up. You either have people who are really, and there's a lot of emotion around it, people that are either pro-marijuana, and it's an herb and it's a medicine, or people who are anti-marijuana. And let me tell you, we've got to get over the whole pro and con. It's not good or bad. It's not black and white at all. It's and it's the most nuanced drug. I'm in drug education for a long time. It's fairly easy to do sex education now. You can get right down to it. It's fairly easy to do tobacco education. You can teach about alcohol. You can teach about opioids. But teaching about weed, this is a whole other ballgame. And that's all right. I'm prepared. We can need passwords and stuff.
Yeah,
we are.
Keep going.
But we got our page girl here. Here's the, well, let me see, is there anything else I want to go? Communications, I'll get to this in a second. But basically, what my message is it's the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. What a great name. Okay, really. As far as I don't care. I don't represent any organization anymore. I can say whatever the heck I want. All right. I'm glad marijuana is legalized. It's about time that it got legalized. At the same time, it is a different thing for teenagers to smoke marijuana than it is for adults. And I want people to walk out of here not just kind of hearing it, and really understanding why. Just like you understand, you really got to put your seatbelt on in the car. See, there's all this stuff that we know about it. Well, we know a lot about marijuana. We know a lot about the brain, and but there's not a lot of people that are really doing the talk without trying to sell something, without one way or the other. But I think as a result of all that, people don't know very much about marijuana at all. So that's the main issue here. And I don't want parents to feel that they are compromised if they smoke marijuana. How can I tell my kid not to smoke marijuana? I teach a lot up in Northern California, right? A teacher says to me, I'm growing 6 plants in my backyard. How can I tell the kids not to smoke weed? Well, the teacher makes around $35,000 a year. She gets an extra $10,000 from those plants. I totally understand why she's doing that. At the same time, it's not okay for kids. If you go to Napa County, there you can have people have wineries. They can even introduce the kids into the business, and at the same time say to them, I don't want you to drink. You're not ready to drink. It's different for a teenager than it is for an adult. And then I'll come back to this, but here's the 2 main things. Which way am I going? This one?
Yeah.
Got it. Takeaways, I don't want to take away here. Number 1, what this is a conglomeration of MRIs or PET scans, and if you're a doctor, you need a loan. Remember, I'm just a high school teacher here. But it's something that shows brain activity, okay? And here they gave a bunch of adolescents and a bunch of adults different kinds of problem-solving tasks and emotional-solving tasks. And what they looked at in the conglomeration of MRIs is that the adult is working much higher in that prefrontal cortex than the kids. We used to think that teenagers had pretty much the same brain as an adult. It's just that they didn't have the experience. But no, biologically, they're not in the same stage of development. I mean, one of the things I love about Waldorf School is they really recognize when the stages are there. Well, they are not at that stage, okay? So you can say to a kid, what were you thinking? And they weren't thinking. and I want to say something. For the adults here that have drugs or alcohol in your lives, it's not simple. It takes a real level of sophistication to be able to have a drug in your life and make your life work. Kids don't have a glass of Cabernet. It's just not what kids do. So my message around this one is the adults need to be the prefrontal cortex for their kids. The kids are not there yet. They're not at that level. That's the first thing that's important to understand, to put this and this level of drug out there into these kids' hands. I hate to say it, but it's kind of like handing them an iPhone and letting them get on the internet. It's like, I don't think they're ready for it all yet. The second thing is this, and I love these pictures. I've come up with them a little while ago. This is what I'm saying an adolescent brain is. And I think it's supposed to be an aerial view in LA of a million little roads going in a million directions. And this is really the talk that I give to kids, and I show kids this, because when I say kids, I'm not talking middle school. I don't teach middle school anymore, because I have middle school parents that'll come back to me and say, what'd you tell my kid? You told my kid he smokes marijuana, it might make him feel good? I don't want my kid to know that. You told my kid he smokes marijuana and takes a bite into an apple and it might taste better? What the hell are you teaching my kid? I stopped teaching middle school. I do drug education here. And what it's about between these ages of 12 and 18 is they're leaving childhood. And I don't know what an adult is, but they're coming into individuation. They're starting to figure out who they are. How am I different from this person or that? Am I a science person? Am I an art person? Am I a people? They're starting to learn who they are, okay? So here, around 12, they got these roads going in all these directions. By 18, now it doesn't solidify till you're 25. By the time they walk out of Waldorf High School, it looks like this. And there's two enormous changes that have taken place in the brain. Number one, there's less highways. It's called pruning. It's just like somebody who prunes a tree to cut out big branches of the tree so the tree gets a chance to really grow and take its shape. Well, here, the roads that they don't take drop away. And they're pruned away, and they're urinating them out for all those teenage years. And it's exactly what's supposed to happen. The other thing that happens is that the roads that they take at this point start to become major highways. And what that's about is this. Let's say this is my brain. I'm going to talk a lot about the brain. And for me, I'm thinking about the Warriors tonight, I was interested in basketball. And so in the beginning, practicing in the schoolyard in front of my house, you engage your ankles, your calves, your quads, and you jump, okay? When you learn the jump, you learn that there's a certain place in the jump where there's a pause, where you don't start to come down yet. There's a split-second pause. That's where you use your forearm and your wrist and your fingertips. That's where you take your shot. To watch Kevin Durant do that is a beautiful thing, okay? In my brain, I went through a whole bunch of connections that were my jump shot connections, okay? So now I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again, and I keep getting on this road. What begins to grow around the outside of these electrical connections is something called myelin. And what myelin is like insulation on a wire. The more you do it, the more it insulates this wire, the better that puppy fires off. So that after a while, that gets hardwired in. So the two things that are going on during this teenage time is number one, roads that they're not taking drop away, and roads that they are taking start to get hardwired in. So it's a very crucial time. I never know exactly which way I'm going to go. But I want to say a couple of things. I want to talk about the brain in a few different ways. So here's the brain. Here's this prefrontal cortex that only us and dolphins have on the planet. And I'm not sure if dolphins use it, but we sure do. I mean, this is an amazing thing that we've been given here. This thing helps us to communicate with one another, but you take it further, this thing is capable of blowing up the world. It invented nuclear weapons. This thing invented the iPhone, for crying out. That's unbelievable what we got going on here. But there's a whole rest of the brain that's here as well, okay? And this guy gets a lot of props in our society. But I want to say something. My whole thing in drug education with teenagers is I want to be able to reach them. It's not just a matter of giving them information. I want to be able to reach them. And that's what you want to do also, is you want to be able to reach your kids, okay? Well, what parents will say is, well, what's the right information? Or what's the right strategy? Or what's the right thing to say? Or what's the right consequence? Or and all of this, you're looking for the formulas here. But the truth is, so much of the communication takes place over here. I mean, I listen to somebody like David Brooks, the writer. He'll say people don't elect the president from here. People elect the president from here. and this is, we're human beings here. And I'll say something else. Before I retired, I was at the County Office of Education. And so they put me in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. Okay. And so they're trying to think that the whole thing is, how do we close the achievement gap? How do we help these kids out that are really marginalized, right? So what's a better curriculum to give them? What's a better teaching strategy to give them? And part of what I was saying, and I was thought of as a touchy-feely guy. I'm sorry, this is not touchy-feely. as the brain developed, we first started with this reptilian brain, okay? And this is the thing that's connected with survival. I got enough food to eat, nobody's gonna hurt me. And once we moved out of this and we came into this mammalian brain, basically where we stopped eating our young, okay? We started to raise our young. So here's where connection and emotion and heart and all that other stuff is concerned. Then comes this prefrontal cortex. And what I was saying to people at the county office is for kids that are growing up in a safe home and they're well loved up and they feel totally connected, man, they come here, they're ready to rock and roll. They're ready to just learn. But you get kids that grow up in chaotic homes or in some way or another have been traumatized, or safety becomes a very big issue for these kids. It's really important for a school to be safe because this is an issue, okay? Then kid says, do I belong here? Does anybody care whether I'm here? That sense of belonging and caring and being part of something, then we can get to the prefrontal cortex. But I believe that a lot of this stuff is hierarchical. You don't just walk in over here. We got a lot going on over there. And that's in the education piece. But what I want to say also is that you as parents, I want you, whatever your discussions and stuff is going on, remember you're trying to communicate deep down in here. Is there trust here that's going on here? Is there connection that's going on here? Oh, and I want to say communication is not like if I got the right words to say, it's going to do it, like a shooting an arrow into a target. No, it's back and forth. And it involves stuff that isn't necessarily rational, but it is very real. And that connection is as important as then being able to hear whatever the information is that's going on. Make sense?
Yeah.
And we're human beings. This is not touchy-feely. We are touchy-feely. Can you imagine what would happen if we didn't get touched? That's grown up. So, stay with the brain now. So I'm talking to the kids about individuation. This is the time when you're trying to figure out who you are, okay? And so here, you got in this prefrontal cortex, you got your parents telling you what to do, you got your school telling you stuff, you got the media telling you stuff, you got your friends telling you stuff, you got all this information as to how you're gonna grow and find out who you are. But you got a whole rest of your brain here. That's very much who you are. And this has a lot to tell you also. Only you kind of need to quiet this down to listen and feel your way in here, because this thing doesn't talk English, this thing isn't rational, this thing isn't even conscious, it's subconscious, but it's a very real part of who we are. And I want you to begin to focus in on some of this area. So I go to one spot over here, that's deep in there, called the nucleus accumbens. And now here comes a science lesson. I want to take a slice of the brain, lay it on a slide, and look at it under a microscope. And when we look at it under a microscope, it looks like this. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before, and I'm not drawing a kite. This is a neuron, a brain cell. This is the cell membrane, this is the nucleus, and it has these long dendrites that reach out. And here's another one. Now, the whole deal in the brain is how do brain cells talk to one another? How do we think? How does the brain work? And in order to understand that, we go all the way to the end of the dendrite on one brain cell, the end of the dendrite on the other. They come close, but they don't touch, like right here or right here. And so I want to take that area and blow that area up. This is the end of one brain cell. This is the beginning of the next. And so basically, what happens in the brain is we get input into the brain all the time. Right now, for so many of you, you're really listening to me talk. Somebody else may be thinking about their kid. I don't know what's going on in anybody's brain. but there's something going on in everybody's brain. When it comes into a brain cell, here's the deal. The brain does basically two things. Number one, it's a chemical factor. Believe it or not, what the brain is doing is cooking up chemicals all day long. They're called neurotransmitters. And so it gets an input into the brain, and it says, okay, let's see. With that input, I think I'm going to make this neurotransmitter. And it cooks it up. And it loads it up on this brain cell. The second thing that happens is an electric spark. And the electric spark is called a synapse. And when a synapse happens, what it does is it fires across this space whatever neurotransmitter it chose to make. And when this puppy hits the receptor site on the next brain cell, we get it. We experience something, feel or think something, and it all happens very quickly, goes on to the next brain cell and the next brain cell. But that's basically the way the brain works. Now, deep down inside in this nucleus accumbens, it happens to make a particular chemical, neurotransmitter, called dopamine. And when dopamine hits the receptor site, some really important things happen. You first get born. The first moments you slip out of maybe you don't slip out of your biological mother's womb, that's from a man's point of view. Anyway, you get outside, all right? They cut the umbilical cord, they tie it up, they sponge off the mucus in the blood, and then hopefully somebody picks that baby up, brings that baby to their chest, and gives that baby some milk. When that milk touches that baby's lips, for whatever reason, what's built into that baby's brain, deep down inside here by nature or God or whatever, when that milk touches that baby's lips, it causes this guy to fire off this neurotransmitter dopamine. And when the dopamine hits the receptor site inside that baby's brain, the baby goes, milk, milk, yeah, milk, that feeling, it's not just thinking, it's feeling, it's everything else. That is the mind-body connection. That feeling is very powerful. In the body, all it is dopamine hitting the receptor site inside this baby's brain. So what we used to think was, well, what is this dopamine about? And mostly what we said it was about was pleasure. Somebody touches your skin nice, you eat some ice cream, it fires off some dopamine, and your brain says, yes, thank you very much. But it turns out it goes much deeper than that. If the baby doesn't get milk, the baby dies, okay? So what this thing that's built into this baby's brain is really saying to this baby is, baby, milk, important. You better believe this is an important thing. So that's really what dopamine is the what's important filter. And I realized that is very much connected with pleasure. I mean, for me, watching the Warriors, that's important. For a lot of you, you can care less. You know, you have other things that fire off dopamine for you. But it's an important part for me. For some people, if I rolled a 56 Chevy into this room and lifted up a hood, some of you would go, wow, man, check that out. It's got some interest. And a lot of you, it doesn't. You got to figure out what that is, okay? And so what I say to the kids is in the beginning, pretty much everybody gets the same stimulus to fire off dopamine. Food, getting held, loved, and everything else. But when you start to individuate, and you start to figure out who you are, then what does fire off dopamine for you? As you go through Waldorf High School, which classes interest you more? Are you more interested in people? Or are you more sport? What are those things that fire off dopamine for you? That's what I want to see get lined up at this point in their lives. I did what my parents told me to do when I was an engineer. Thank God I finally, found out about teaching, okay? And now this fires off dopamine for me. They pay me for it. It's called getting a life. Okay, that's whatever. That is the message that I want for teenagers to get at this point. Is you need to get what are you interested in? You need to get a life. Okay, because here's where drugs come into it. Instead of this happening, somebody can come along and say, here, smoke a little of this. tetrahydrocannabinol, the active ingredient in marijuana. Or here, drink a little of this. And I will not scare you with all the drugs I see out there. I'm going to stop right here. Okay. Now, here's where brains get different. Some people get born with brains, and from their parents, they look at this stuff and they say, well, why would I want to mess around with my brain that way? And they're not interested in it at all. And I'm sure some of you are lucky enough to have that. Some people are born with a brain where they are really interested in trying it out. And they smoke some marijuana and they get real paranoid, okay? They don't use it anymore. Or they drink alcohol and they get real sick. They don't use it anymore. Some kids get born with a brain, and we'll just do it with weed here. And they smoke some marijuana, it does this. It fires off some dopamine. This kid says, oh man, that's not bad. Maybe I'll do it again sometime. And there's gradations on this, but some kids get born with a brain and they're inheriting this in your DNAs from whoever those folks are back there, just like they inherited their faces and everything else, they're inheriting their brains. Some people inherit a brain where they smoke weed and it does this. To say in the Bronx, bada bing, it fires off an enormous amount of dopamine. Yeah.
Can you explain how that happens?
Get born with it.
No, I mean how the THC fires off more dopamine. What happens there on the molecular level?
It's a good, something? I don't even think of it, just doesn't. It's just part of what's and I'll tell you something. That what I'm showing here, this is the basis why people take any drug. Why does alcohol do it? Why does cocaine do it? Why does crystal meth do it? Why do all of those? They have the way I describe it is I say somehow or other they have the ability in it, some magic or something in it that has the ability to trick the brain to fire off dopamine. But I will go into it a little bit further with that. But that's what I would say at this point. So let me go into this for a second here. So picture a ninth grade girl smokes some marijuana and it works. It fires off a whole bunch of dopamine. I don't care what this kid's parents say. I don't care what this kid's friends say. I don't care what anybody says. What this kid's brain is telling her is, ooh, this good. This very important. This like mother's milk. Okay. And then you can get the whole scenario. And not only that, they just made it legal. And it's a medicine, and it's an herb, and it's on and on and on and on. But the driving force is a real message that this weed is giving, okay? And so the first message that I give to kids is this feeling of firing off a bunch of dopamine, in my opinion, I think is a good thing. I hope that everybody in their lives has a place where your brain goes, yes, stepping on a lacrosse court or seeing a great movie or hearing the Pythagorean, I don't know what that is, but I hope that people can feel that this, I'm not saying that this is good or bad. It's not one thing or the other. We're going to talk about it a lot. But there's one thing that's important to understand, and that is that this is a trick. This is not the real thing. This is a trick that has the magic in it to fire off dopamine to make this happen, but it's not the real thing. We can see that more as adults. Teenagers don't see that as clearly. This is life, babe. No, this is a trick, okay? And what I say is, I think it's a better trick than alcohol or cocaine or crystal meth or all this other kind of stuff. But to trick the brain at this point, when you're trying to figure out who you are, this little puppy back here is your navigator. That's telling you what you're interested in. That's telling you where your juice is. That to trick it at this point is to short circuit some really important work that you need to do, okay? And when I say trick it, I mean, when they were 10, they didn't have to worry about how to party. They knew how to party. But once they start to individuate, how do you party? How do you take care of stress? What do you do when you hang out with friends? What all of those things are tasks that kids need to figure out. But I'll tell you, in this area, you can have a bunch of ninth grade kids get together. Okay, well, what are we going to do? There's very often one person in that group that says, "Hey, let's just roll ourselves a fat one." That way, we can all get loaded, and we don't need to figure out what to do. It's a done deal. You don't need to figure out how to party and have a good time. Just drink a little of this, smoke a little of this, and it'll be there for you. You don't need to figure out how to take care of stress. Just smoke a little weed, and you're not so stressed anymore. And let me tell you, it can satisfy a lot of things. But your job as a teenager at this point is you need to figure that stuff out. Because what will happen is a number of things. Number one, this is what gets hardwired in. Not this and now we got some trouble with that. And where the trouble really comes from is the brain is not used to having all this dopamine fire off. So one of the things it does is it has to make more dopamine receptor sites so it can handle all the dopamine. So you start to get what I call a party brain, where you get all the, okay, we're ready, where's all the dopamine? The second thing that happens is that the more you pound these receptor sites with this kind of dopamine, you begin to dull them out. You don't feel it as much anymore. So now all of a sudden I'm going to need more of this to make this happen. And the suffering of an addict, the best book I ever read on addiction, a guy by the name of Gabor Mate, the name of it was called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. What an interesting image it is of somebody that wants more but can feel it less. So maybe at some point, they got to go into rehab. What do they rehab to if they never did form these things in the first place? So now not only do I have to figure out how to take care of myself and how to do all this stuff, I also got this other weed thing hardwired in. My main message for kids, and it's going to go through Alameda County, I'm really excited about it, is weed can wait. Weed can wait. And I'll tell you something that catches a subtlety in there too, because you're not going to say opioids can wait. You know what I mean? It's a different ball game here. And we're fighting, you need to understand the culture for kids to smoke weed. Even if you don't smoke weed, you want to be known as somebody that's 420 friendly. This is, you don't want to be on the outside. So let me teach some stuff about weed here, because we're getting, I don't want to lose this whole thing here. So, yeah, I don't even need that page.
You sure?
Yeah,
Okay.
forget it.
It's there for you.
It's there for me, that's nice. It's comforting. As my mind goes, I can always go back there. That's the main thing for the PowerPoint. Yeah.
So I have a question
Yeah.
about kids moving from marijuana to other drugs.
Yes,
And I'm wondering if what you were saying about how it dulls down.
yes,
And then the more receptor sites.
yes.
Is what pulls them from weed into wanting to try other things.
Yes, but maybe.
Okay.
You want to know something? I kid used an expression a couple of weeks ago that I said, well, then you're going to need more of this to do this. And the kid says, oh, yeah, all you have to do is upgrade. I loved it. Upgrade. Let me tell you what upgrading is about. Let me teach about weed here a little bit. There's a few plants on the planet, not very many, but a couple of plants on the planet that happen to have chemicals in them that match chemicals in the human brain. In China and Afghanistan, they got a poppy plant. And it's not the same as the California poppy plant. The poppy plant there gets a big, thick stem, and when it gets ripe, it gets a bulb. If you squeeze that bulb, a liquid comes out that matches something in the human brain. The liquid is opium. The human brain has an opioid site. It says, I know you opium, I do it myself, come on in. And so like a key into a lock, opium comes into the opioid site, changes the way it works, and somebody gets high on opium. Well, in this cannabis plant, there's really two sets of drugs. One is a set of drugs called CBDs, and they don't get you high, but I got a feeling they are gonna add a lot to our whole pharmaceutical thing. It has a lot to offer. The other drug that's in this marijuana plant is a drug called cannabinol, better known as THC. The human brain says, I know you THC, I know you tetrahydrocannabinol, I do it myself. I've got cannabinoid sites, come on in. So you introduce THC into a human brain and you wait about 5 minutes and then you take a PET scan or an MRI or whatever the heck that is. And what you see is that there's 5 places in the brain, 3 big ones and 2 little ones that light up. Those 5 places in the brain are cannabinoid sites. They say, we know you THC, we do it ourselves, come on in. It comes in here and changes the way these 5 sites work, and somebody experiences being high on marijuana. This guy fires off dopamine, so we know that's the charge. This guy here, hypothalamus, makes you hungry. That's what gives you the munchies. This guy here is called the cerebellum. And this has a very interesting thing. It deals with coordination. Not just physical, but mental coordination as well. And all THC does to it is slow it down. So that if you're driving a car, your reflexes are a little bit slower. If you're into sports, you're moving a little bit slower. In your mind, if you're ADD, a little attention deficit disorder, you got all these thoughts rolling around your head, you smoke some weed, you can chill. And it's one of the reasons why, because I work mostly with at-risk kids, that's one of the things that the kids are attracted to is I can smoke some weed, finally I can sit back and chill, okay? The problem with it is once the drug wears off, they get more ADD than they were before until it balances out. This guy here is the one that I use when I'm working with staff and teachers as being the most important. This thing is called the hippocampus. And what this guy has to do with is memory. And I really want to explore this one as soon as I finish this whole THC thing. But this has to do with learning. So here's these 5 sites, and here's this drug, THC. I went to high school in the Bronx, New York City, 1958 to 1962. And it was a tough high school. There was no weed. Hardly, I remember Miles Davis, trumpet player, he got busted for weed. Other than that, there was no weed around. Oh, maybe, in Greenwich Village, the artists or whatever. So I got sent off to a military school for 4 years. This is the engineering, whatever. It's a maritime academy. I became a ship's engineer for a few years. And if I didn't get seasick, I might be really rich today. 1966, I come out of that school and I move into Greenwich Village in New York, and weed was everywhere. 1962, hardly anybody ever heard about weed. 4 years later, here it is all across the country. Hippies that were rejecting society. They said the whole tobacco and alcohol thing is whack. Down in Mexico, they got this drug marijuana. They went down there, they bought it as a brick, 2.2 pounds, a kilo. Whoever got it, brought it up north, broke off handfuls, filled up a sandwich baggie. They were called lids back then, if anybody remembers that. And it cost about $5. And whoever had it would roll up a couple of doobies. People would sit around and they'd get high. The drug worked. Hippies got high in the 60s. I was there. That weed was 1 to 3% THC. And the drug worked fine. Next thing that happened was Vietnam War. A lot of people went to Vietnam, including me. And I smoked weed in Vietnam, and I will never forget it. That weed was 5 to 10% THC. And to understand the math, let's say this is 2% and this is 8%. This weed was 4 times stronger than this weed. If you think about it with alcohol, think about having a rum and coke in San Francisco and then go to Saigon and have a rum and coke, only they put 4 shots of rum in instead of 1. That was this weed. And it turns out it was a different strain. It was all cannabis, but this stuff was cannabis sativa, where this stuff is cannabis indica. And so I remember some of the soldiers saying, man, we bring this back to the States. They'll go crazy for this back in the States. And a lot of them came back across the Pacific, landed in California, took these indica seeds in their pockets and said, let's just go up north. Humboldt County, Mendocino County, Trinity County, Siskiyou County. They just got trees up there. Let's go up there, we'll plant our indica seeds, and we'll start ourselves a little marijuana business. Let me tell you, that little marijuana business has made Northern California the center for marijuana for the country. They changed, marijuana changed from $5 an ounce to $5 a gram. Stop being a hippie thing, turned into big business, and boy, you ain't seen nothing until you see this roll out to see how big a business we're talking about here. So now we get into the business, we learn how to grow it, and the first thing that the grower learns is when the plants are about 3 weeks old, there's a male plant and a female plant. Male plant has a little blue flower. What the grower does is go around, find all the male plants, dig them up and throw them away, and literally throw away half their crop. But then you got the female plant growing by themselves without a male plant around, so the female plant doesn't get fertilized. And if it doesn't get fertilized, it doesn't make seeds. So the potency of the plant, instead of going into the seed, goes into the bud. So they started to grow just female indica plants. That bumped it up to 10 to 15% THC. And then what I say to the kids is, you guys haven't even been born yet, okay? Now you got to fast forward about 25, 30 years while they're up there hybrids and fertilizing and cloning and all this other kind of stuff. So that the common weed in this area is between 20 and 25% THC. And my son from Berkeley High says, me, Dad, we can go across the street and buy a nickel bag of purple bud. What a nickel bag of purple bud is, it's just a little bud of marijuana, it's about this big, and a nickel is $5 on the streets. Well, I want you to know they are buying some of the strongest weed in the world today. I'm talking about Pakistan, India, and everywhere else. That we've got quite a product that's up there. Second thing is, $5, if you took that $5 nug and you took it to New York, you get $20 for it. The reason it's so cheap is that this is where it comes from. So our kids are exposed to some of the strongest weed in the world today, and it's cheap. And now, here's what they're walking into. First of all, they're walking into legalization. It just happened, and this is opening up a whole new ballgame. It becomes a product, and at the same time, they brought in new technology. So let me introduce you to the new technology. You take this 25% bud and you blow butane through it. I know that sounds weird, but butane, that's why sometimes these things can blow up. You blow butane through this bud, and what comes out the other side is some really highly concentrated stuff that's called wax. And wax is right around 50% THC. And then I don't want to go through all the processes that go on, but I'll tell you what the final product is. The final product is what's called a dab. And there isn't one kid that doesn't know what a dab is today, because they also made a dance out of it. And you know what the dab, so the dab is 90 to 95% THC. And the dance is when you take a hit of 90 to 95% THC, you cough your brains out. And here's the dance. You're coughing your brains out. And so you can laugh about it. And this is where these kids are at. And the delivery system has changed. You can't really smoke this stuff the way you did the other weed. So the tobacco companies have come along and invented a battery. How do they put batteries in it? Toothbrush, everything you look at's got a battery in it. They invented a little battery that can heat a coil so hot that whatever touches that coil vaporizes off the coil. So now you can take anything from 50 to 95% THC, put it on the coil and go and inhale. No smoke, no smell, no fuss, no muss, and this is where they're at. Can you imagine coming in at this level of a drug when this is where it started and this worked fine? This is no lightweight drug. This is a serious thing, and there's a number of odd things about marijuana, about THC. One of them is that there's three kinds of drugs that get you high: uppers, downers, and all-arounders. Drugs that speed you up, like methamphetamine or cocaine, and fire off a lot of dopamine. Drugs that slow you down, like Xanax or cough medicine, and they fire off dopamine. And the third kind of drug that gets you high is a hallucinogenic, like mushrooms or LSD. Well, THC is a hallucinogenic. And that's an important thing to understand also, because there's a way in which it's playing with psychology that the other drugs don't. And there's a lot, we don't know where all of this takes us. But one thing I can tell you, if you smoke marijuana, you can't overdose. You can keep smoking blunt after blunt, bong hit after bong hit. After a while, these 5 cannabinoid sites just get saturated. You can't get any higher, you're not gonna, that's it. However, if you put marijuana, THC in an edible, now it doesn't go up to your brain in 5 minutes from your lungs to your brain. It's got to go through your whole digestive system, then out. It takes 45 minutes to an hour for it to come on. But when it comes on that way, and I don't know why, your brain can absorb all the THC that's in that cookie or brownie. And if there's enough THC in that cookie or brownie, all of a sudden you just discovered, holy cow, this isn't like smoking weed, I'm tripping. The other odd thing about weed that actually has to do with this is that most drugs are liquid soluble. Weed is fat soluble. It dissolves in fat. It's the reason why it's so easy for these kids to make edibles. All you need is some butter, which is pure fat, and some marijuana bud. Put it in a pan, turn up the heat. The heat will release the THC. It'll go into the butter, and then you put it in a cookie or a brownie, and now you got an edible with no idea how much THC is in there. And so it's possible to trip from eating an edible. Yeah, I want to say two things. One is around this fat stuff that's really important, because when THC comes into the body, it goes into the fatty tissue in the body, where all the other drugs go into the blood, get filtered out by the liver, and in 24 hours, it goes through your liver, your kidneys, your bladder, and then you pee it out, and your body is clean of whatever drugs you took. Not so with marijuana. With marijuana, it stays in the fatty tissue of your body. And the fatty tissue of your body is not your butt or your thigh, it's brain cells. That's really the thing that's using fat, is brain cells. So it sits inside these places. That's why you don't go through a hangover, you don't go through withdrawal right away. It's still there. And it's there for 3 days. And so it takes 3 days for these things. And I'm going to talk about it with hippocampus, that has to do with memory. It takes 3 days for this guy to clear out. And I want to say something else. If somebody is smoking marijuana more than every 3 days, like every day or every other day, then before that goes out of their system, they put more in. And before that goes out, they put more in. And before they do that for a couple of months, they won't come up with a clean urine analysis test for 30 to 45 to 60 days. So that's those two things about marijuana that are really different. Is number one, it's a hallucinogenic, and number two, it stays in fatty tissue. Now, what's the big deal about the fatty tissue?
Could you just mention what the 5 sites are again, please? You mentioned hypothalamus.
You want the names of
cerebellum.
them?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the nucleus accumbens, this is the hypothalamus, this is the cerebellum, this is the hippocampus, that's the one I'm going to talk about, and this one back here is the amygdala. And I'm not going to talk about it's a lot to be said, but with a lot to learn about that, but I think that has some of the spiritual aspects to it. But let's take a look at this hippocampus. What this hippocampus has to do with is memory, okay? So I'm going to draw memory over here, but it's really all throughout the brain. And the way this works is, remember, this is the thinking part of the brain. So this hippocampus is a subconscious part of the brain, but it's doing quite a lot of work. The first thing it does is whatever you're working on up here in your prefrontal cortex, it subconsciously is going into all your memory banks and pulling up all the knowledge you have about whatever it is that you're working on here. Like, for instance, you go and you pick up an apple and you take a bite out of the apple. You may not realize it, but you totally expect it to taste like, if it tasted like a banana, you'd stop the whole world here. You know what's going on, okay? Why? Because before you ever take a bite out of the apple, the hippocampus goes, hey, check it out. We're going to have an apple. Is it a red apple? Is it a green apple? Is it a yellow apple? It's a green apple. Is it a Pippin? Is it a Granny Smith? I mean, you got apple knowledge that gets pulled up before you ever take a bite out of the apple. You with me? Okay, so now let's look at it in school. 4th grade, teacher in 4th grade says, okay, class, you're now ready to start learning about percents. So I'm going to teach you about 50%. So what goes on in this 4th grader's brain is that it goes, oh, well, I know about parts of a number. I got all this fraction knowledge. Not only that, this year we learned about decimals. I got decimal knowledge. I got a whole bunch of math knowledge that gets pulled up into this 4th grader's brain. The teacher teaches the new thing about 50%. That rattles around in the kid's brain. And if the kid gets it and goes, I got it, now I see what 50% is, the hippocampus does the second thing, which is it puts the new information into memory. So a way that we learn is we pull up from what we know, and if something new is important, it puts the new stuff in. And the other thing that it does subconsciously is it trashes information. So it's constantly going, that's not important, that's not what, that's important, okay? That's the hippocampus. This gets whacked by weed. It makes it not work well, okay? So the first thing that happens is you don't pull up off a long-term memory very well. Watch the experience. You get high, you smoke some weed, and now you pick up the apple and you take a bite out of the apple. Only you're not pulling up all the old apple memories. So you bite into the apple here and you go, oh my goodness, I may have had 1,000 apples in my life, but you gotta taste this apple because this apple tastes special. It's almost like eating an apple for the first time. That's the shift, okay? What I say to the kids is when you were 2 or 3 years old, you might have gotten down on your hands and knees and looked at ants, right? You're done with ants. Smoke some weed, knock this out, and you might go, whoa, check out the ants. It's a very interesting, I mean, it's a little bit like Zen mind, beginner's mind. You know, when your mind is empty, you can learn everything. You follow? So as I was teaching at SOTA, School of the Arts, kid says, Mr. Cantor, we smoke weed, it makes us more creative. We can really think outside the box when we smoke weed. I say to them, you're right. You can think outside the box. All sorts of thoughts can float around in your brain. And then they say, yeah, and then we get into these deep conversations. And in the middle of the deep conversation, somebody goes, what was I talking about? I know I was talking about something deep. I just forgot what it was. It also doesn't put stuff into memory very well either. It just knocks that whole puppy out. And it's a very interesting part of a marijuana high. The problem is, after the high is over, how's this hippocampus? The weed's still there, and it's going to be there for 3 days. So it takes 3 days. It doesn't mean you don't learn at all, but it takes 3 days for this guy to clear up the process information the way you're supposed to be processing information. No less than a kid is smoking weed more than every 3 days. And so this is what I say as far as schools are concerned. I don't want to see people take a moral stance or anything else about it, but be able to say, listen, this is an institution of learning. And this hippocampus is very much a part of learning. And we don't want you to smoke, but we want this to be clean. That's a way to do it that I think is more of a messaging thing that people can buy into.